On a quiet stretch of Louisiana highway, a black man eagerly drives toward his new workplace. But his journey takes a brutal turn when he pulls over a reckless patrol car endangering in the road. Their abuse of power and contempt for black men explode into violence, leaving him bloodied and abandoned beside the car they just set ablaze. But what they don't know is that the black man they just assaulted is their new boss, and he's about to show them they've made the biggest mistake of their lives. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the open highway leading into St. Martin Parish. It was a quiet morning, the kind that felt like a fresh start, full of promise. The kind that made a man believe in second chances and change, in the possibility of rewriting history. Isaiah Carter, dressed in his crisp uniform, drove steadily toward his new future, the first black sheriff in a county that had never seen one. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his Chevrolet Tahoe, a sense of determination tightening in his chest. This wasn't just a job. It was a statement, a fight long overdue. He had spent years earning this. Years navigating a system that wasn't built for men like him. Years proving that justice wasn't about skin color, but about integrity, about honor. And now, as he approached the sheriff's office that would soon be under his command, he wondered if they were ready for him. If they would see him for the leader he was, or just another black man who had gone too far, climbed too high. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, probably the mayor's office, checking on his arrival. He ignored it, focusing instead on the road ahead. That's when he saw it. A patrol car, swerving recklessly down the highway, weaving between lanes with blatant disregard for traffic laws. Isaiah's brow furrowed. The vehicle, a standard issue for St. Martin's deputies, accelerated past him, its tires spitting gravel as it cut dangerously close to his front bumper. His instincts flared. His foot tapped the brake, just enough to maintain control. What the hell were they doing? This wasn't a routine pursuit. No sirens. No emergency lights. Just reckless, unchecked power. He exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. Not today. Not under my watch. He flicked on his lights, signaling for the driver to pull over. At first, the car didn't respond, continuing its erratic course down the highway. But then, with a sudden jerk, the patrol car swerved to the side, rolling to an aggressive stop in a cloud of dust and resentment. Isaiah pulled up behind them, stepping out slowly, deliberately, not as a man, but as the law. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached the vehicle, posture firm, voice steady. "Step out of the vehicle," he commanded, not as a request, but as an order. The doors swung open. Two white officers emerged, both in standard sheriff's department uniforms, both exuding the kind of arrogance that came from knowing they had never been challenged. The first, Ethan Walker, a wiry man with sharp features, stepped forward, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "You got a problem, boy?" he drawled, his voice thick with disdain. Isaiah didn't flinch. "Deputy, you were driving recklessly. You nearly caused an accident." He kept his tone even, professional, refusing to take the bait. "I need to see your license and registration." The second officer, Ryan Cole, a broader man with a permanent scowl, let out a humorless laugh. "License and registration," he echoed, shaking his head. "Who the hell do you think you are, pulling over us?" Isaiah lifted his badge, holding it firmly in front of them. "Sheriff Carter, your new boss." Silence. Then Ethan let out a slow, mocking chuckle, exchanging a look with Ryan before spitting onto the asphalt between them. No, see, that's not how this works. Ain't no way in hell they'd let someone like you run this department." Ryan took a step forward, his eyes cold. "You expect us to believe that?" He glanced at the badge, then back at Isaiah. "You think flashing that little tin star means we have to listen to you?" Isaiah exhaled, patience thinning but still intact. "I don't give a damn what you believe," he said, voice edged now. "You're going to comply, or you're going to have a much bigger problem than a traffic violation." That did it. Ryan's smirk vanished. His lip curled, disgust curling his features as he stepped in closer, invading Isaiah's space. "Listen here, boy," he hissed, and that word boy struck like a blade, like something meant to wound, to remind, to reduce. "I don't know where you think you are, but around here, we don't take orders from." The punch came fast, a sudden vicious blow to Isaiah's jaw. The world jolted sideways as he staggered back, tasting blood, barely catching himself before he hit the ground. His ears rang, but his body reacted on instinct. Training. Control. Do not engage. But then the second hit came. A sharp crack against his ribs. His breath left him in a painful thrush as he folded forward, catching himself against the hood of the patrol car. He tried to push himself upright, but Ryan's hand was on his shoulder, slamming him down against the metal. "You really thought you could walk in here and take over, huh?" Ethan sneered, his voice close to Isaiah's ear. "Thought you could just waltz in, tell us what to do?" "No, sir. Not in our department. Not ever." Isaiah gritted his teeth, forcing his breath steady, forcing his body to stay grounded despite the searing pain radiating through his ribs. He had been in fights before, had taken blows, had endured, but this wasn't about dominance. This was about erasure. About making sure he understood, right here on this empty road, that they didn't see him as a leader. They didn't even see him as a man. Ryan's hand twisted into Isaiah's collar, yanking him upright just enough for Ethan to land a brutal knee to his stomach. Isaiah gasped, body instinctively doubling over, vision blurring for a second. "You don't belong here," Ryan muttered, shaking his head. Isaiah spat blood onto the asphalt. And yet he panted, voice hoarse but unyielding, "I'm still standing." Ryan's eyes darkened. "We'll fix that." Then came the fire. The air was thick with heat, the sun glaring down on the deserted highway as Isaiah struggled to steady his breath. His ribs ached with every inhale, his jaw throbbed from the impact of Ethan's fist, but his mind remained razor-sharp, refusing to buckle under the weight of their hatred. He had fought too hard, endured too much, to let two small men break him now. But they weren't done. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, his smirk widening as he took a step back, surveying his work like a man admiring a masterpiece. "Still think you're sheriff, boy?" he sneered, his boots grinding against the pavement as he circled Isaiah like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Isaiah lifted his head, forcing himself to meet Ethan's gaze, his voice steady despite the fire burning in his ribs. "I don't think. I know." Ryan let out a laugh, dark and humorless, as he grabbed Isaiah by the collar and slammed him against the hood of the patrol car, the metal scorching hot beneath his cheek. "You don't know shit," Ryan spat, his breath hot against Isaiah's ear. "This county doesn't belong to you. Never has. Never will." Isaiah clenched his jaw, willing himself to stay calm. He could feel the tension in Ryan's grip, the barely contained rage vibrating through the man's body. This wasn't just about him. This was about what he represented. A man like Isaiah stepping into their world, taking a position they believed wasn't meant for him. They needed to put him back in his place, to remind him that no badge, no title, would ever change what they saw when they looked at him. Ethan exhaled sharply, wiping his mouth as if just being near Isaiah left a stain. "Damn shame, really," he mused, shaking his head. "They actually thought they could put a nigger in charge of us." Isaiah's blood ran cold, but he didn't flinch. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Ethan chuckled at his silence. "You're quiet now, huh? Where's all that authority? All that big talk about being the boss?" He turned to Ryan, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "See, that's what happens when you let these people think they're something they ain't. They start getting ideas." Ryan grunted in agreement, his grip tightening. "We should have never let it get this far." Isaiah gritted his teeth, feeling his muscles coil beneath the weight of their words. His instincts screamed at him to fight back, to shove Ryan off, to put Ethan on the ground and remind them exactly who the hell they were dealing with. But he knew how that would end. He knew how these men operated. If he gave them an excuse, any excuse, they'd twist the story. They'd say he attacked them. They'd paint themselves as the victims, as the officers forced to subdue an aggressive suspect. And in a place like St. Martin, in a department filled with men just like them, Isaiah knew damn well whose side the story would favor. So he stayed still. He took the pain. He let them think they were winning. And then, just as Ryan pulled back his fist for another blow, Ethan grabbed his arm, stopping him mid-swing. Isaiah forced himself to suppress the flicker of relief. Whatever restraint Ethan was showing wasn't for Isaiah's sake. "You know what?" Ethan murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Beating him isn't enough. He needs to remember this day." A slow, Creeping dread unfurled in Isaiah's gut as he watched Ethan reach into his pocket, pulling out a silver Zippo lighter. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" Ethan smirked, flicking the lid open, the tiny flame dancing in the reflection of his sunglasses. "Damn right I am. Let's send a message." Isaiah's pulse pounded in his ears as Ryan released him, letting him collapse onto his knees, his body screaming in protest as he tried to push himself up. But before he could react, before he could stop them, Ryan was already at his car, the sharp scent of gasoline filling the air as he doused the Tahoe in long, deliberate streaks. Isaiah forced his battered limbs to move, tried to get to his feet, but Ethan was there in an instant, a boot driving into his stomach, knocking him back down onto the scorching pavement. "Stay put, boy," Ethan muttered, crouching down beside him, his voice dropping to something almost friendly, almost casual. "I want you to watch." Isaiah lifted his head just in time to see Ryan strike the lighter, the flame catching in the fuel-soaked air. And then the world erupted into fire. Flames swallowed the Tahoe in an instant, the heat radiating off the explosion, the metal warping and twisting as the blaze consumed it. The roar of the fire drowned out everything else, filling Isaiah's ears with a deafening crackle of burning rubber, of melting steel, of his entire past, his badge, his uniform, his files, his memories going up in smoke. Ethan stood back, admiring the destruction like a man admiring fine art. "Now that's a pretty sight," he mused, hands on his hips. "Should have done this years ago." Ryan huffed a laugh, wiping his hands on his pants like he'd just finished a job well done. "You think he gets the message now?" Ethan glanced down at Isaiah, who was still on the ground, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, sweat dripping down his brow from the sheer heat of it all. He smirked. "Nah," Ethan said, "but he will." Then, just like that, they turned and walked away, their patrol car kicking up dust as they drove off, leaving Isaiah behind, broken and burning under the rising Louisiana sun. The smell of burning rubber and scorched metal choked the air, thick black smoke curling into the sky, a dark stain against the bright Louisiana sun. Isaiah lay on the blistering pavement, every breath a struggle, every movement sending white-hot pain lancing through his ribs. His fingers dug into the gravel, the sharp edges biting into his skin, grounding him in the reality of what had just happened. His car, his only means of getting to the sheriff's office, his badge, his paperwork, his gun, all of it gone, turned to ash by the fire still roaring in front of him. He tried to push himself up, but his body refused, his strength drained by the blows, the suffocating heat, the sheer weight of what had just been done to him. They had left him to burn. A man discarded, nothing more than a reminder to themselves and to anyone watching that power belonged to them. The humiliation burned deeper than the bruises, deeper than the cracked ribs. They hadn't just beaten him, they had erased him. But he was still breathing. He sucked in a ragged breath, forced himself to focus. He needed to move, to get out of here before the fire spread. He dug his elbows into the pavement, every motion agony, but he gritted his teeth and crawled forward, inch by inch, dragging himself away from the wreckage, away from the heat that threatened to consume him. His vision blurred, sweat and smoke stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. His body screamed for rest, for relief, but the anger inside him burned hotter than the flames behind him. They thought this was over. They thought they'd won. But Isaiah Carter had spent his whole life fighting against men like Ethan Walker and Ryan Cole. He had clawed his way up in a system built to keep men like him out, had faced down every barrier, every closed door, every sneer that told him he didn't belong. And still, he had made it. And now, no matter how much they wanted to deny it, he was still their sheriff. He pressed his hand against his ribs, hissing at the sharp pain, then forced himself to his knees. His legs trembled beneath him, barely able to hold his weight, but he pushed forward, staggering to his feet. The road stretched out ahead, long and empty, the distant hum of cars somewhere beyond the horizon. He had no phone, no radio, no way to call for help, but he had his legs, and that was enough. He took a step, then another, then another. His breath was shallow, each inhale a fresh stab of pain, but he kept moving. The sun climbed higher, baking his skin, soaking his uniform with sweat and blood. The smell of gasoline lingered in his nose, a phantom reminder of how close he had come to never walking away from that fire. Minutes blurred into an eternity. The road stretched endlessly before him, each step heavier than the last. His body screamed for him to stop, but he refused. Stopping meant giving in. Stopping meant letting them win. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A patrol car. His body tensed instinctively, but this one was different. No reckless swerving. No flashing lights meant to intimidate. Just a standard cruiser, moving steadily down the road, a lifeline in the middle of nowhere. Isaiah forced himself to stay upright, raising one shaking arm, praying the officer inside wasn't another one of them. The car slowed, then stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The driver's side door creaked open, and a young officer stepped out, cautious, but not hostile, his eyes widening at the sight of Isaiah's battered face, the torn uniform, the blood soaking through the fabric. "Jesus Christ," the officer murmured, hurrying forward. "Sir, are you—" He stopped, blinking, his mouth opening and closing as recognition dawned in his eyes. Isaiah straightened, despite the pain. "I need a ride." The officer hesitated. You're the new sheriff." Isaiah gave a single, steady nod. "That's right." The officer swallowed, glancing past him at the smoke still curling into the sky, then back at Isaiah. What the hell happened? Isaiah didn't answer. Didn't have the time, the patience, or the breath to explain. "Take me to the station," he ordered, voice hoarse but unyielding. The officer hesitated only a second longer before nodding. "Yes, sir." Isaiah climbed into the passenger seat, his entire body screaming in protest, but his mind locked on one single thought. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional crackle of the police radio and the steady hum of the tires against the asphalt. Isaiah sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his body screaming in protest with every jolt and turn, but he refused to show it. Pain was secondary. His focus was sharp, his mind already constructing the next move. The young officer behind the wheel, Marcus Lee, according to his nameplate, kept glancing at him, the tension in his shoulders growing thicker with every mile. He wanted to ask questions, wanted to understand why the man who was supposed to be his new sheriff looked like he had just survived a war. Isaiah beat him to it. "How many men are on shift at the station right now?" His voice was hoarse, raw from the heat and smoke, but there was no hesitation in it. Marcus swallowed. Morning rotation, probably 6 or 7. The captain's in. Some deputies coming off night duty." "Why?" Isaiah's jaw clenched. "I need every one of them in the briefing room the second we get there." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, shouldn't you see a doctor first?" Isaiah turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto the young officers with the weight of something immovable, something unshakable. "I'll go when this is handled. Until then, I need you to do exactly as I say." Marcus nodded quickly, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "Yes, sir." The station came into view, a squat brick building with St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office emblazoned above the entrance. A few squad cars were parked outside, the lot mostly empty save for a couple of off-duty vehicles. Isaiah forced himself upright as they pulled in, ignoring the way his ribs protested, ignoring the stiffness creeping into his muscles. He couldn't walk into that building looking weak. Marcus parked near the entrance, scrambling out of the car as Isaiah reached for the door handle. Before the young officer could offer help, Isaiah had already stepped out, his movements deliberate, controlled. He would not limp. He would not waver. He had been left for dead on the side of the road, but he refused to walk into his own station like a man beaten. The moment he stepped inside, all eyes turned to him. The room hushed, conversations dying mid-sentence as deputies took in the sight of him bloodied, bruised, uniform torn and stained with sweat and ash. Someone stood abruptly from behind the front desk. "Jesus Christ, Sheriff." Isaiah didn't stop moving. Briefing room. Now. A few officers scrambled into action, confusion and tension buzzing through the air as they moved. Marcus followed at his heels, his radio crackling as he relayed orders, rounding up every available deputy in the building. Isaiah pushed open the door to the briefing room, stepping inside. The overhead lights were too bright, the sterile scent of coffee and paperwork thick in the air. Within minutes they filled the spacemen and women in uniform, some cautious, some outright stunned, but all watching him. The weight of their stares pressed against him, not with respect, not yet, but with curiosity, with uncertainty. He was an outsider, a stranger, and now, a victim. He wouldn't let that stand. He braced his hands against the table at the front of the room, letting the silence settle before he spoke. Ethan Walker, Ryan Cole. His voice was steady, low, the kind that demanded attention without having to shout. They attacked me this morning. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Some exchanged glances, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. Isaiah continued. They pulled me over, didn't know who I was. When I told them, they laughed, called me a liar. Then they beat me, destroyed my car, left me to burn. He let those last words settle, let them sting. And they did it because of one thing. He looked around the room, eyes cutting through every officer standing there. Because I look like this. A thick, suffocating silence followed. Now, I don't care what you thought about this department before today. I don't care how things were run, who had power, who covered for who. That ends. Right now. He straightened, ignoring the way his body screamed in protest. I want every available unit searching for them. They don't get a head start. They don't get to walk away like nothing happened. They're fugitives, and they will be brought in. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Captain Howard, a man in his early 50s, stiff and unreadable, stepped forward. Sir, do you have proof of what you're saying? Isaiah turned his bruised face toward him. Let him take in the cut along his jaw, the torn uniform, the blood drying at his temple. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge, the only thing that had survived the fire. He set it down on the table, its blackened edges still warm to the touch. That proof enough for you, Captain? Howard's gaze flickered, then lowered. He swallowed. Yes, sir. Isaiah exhaled, a slow, measured breath. Good. Then let's get to work. The station erupted into controlled chaos, deputies moving quickly, their radios crackling as orders were relayed, descriptions were given, and squad cars began rolling out in search of Ethan Walker and Ryan Cole. Isaiah stood at the center of it all, unmoving, watching, waiting. He was not a victim. He was their sheriff. And this department, his department, was about to learn exactly what that meant. Captain Howard remained at his side, his expression tense, unreadable, but there was no protest now. No hesitation. The weight of the moment had shifted, the air in the room thick with an unspoken understanding. This wasn't about department loyalty anymore. This was about justice. Sir, a voice broke through the hum of activity. Marcus Lee, still at attention, eyes sharp with something that hadn't been there before. Respect. We got a location. A call just came in from a bartender over on Route 19. 2 off-duty deputies matching their description were seen heading into a bar a little over an hour ago. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Of course they wouldn't be in hiding. They thought they had won. They thought they could drink, laugh, celebrate what they had done without a second thought. They thought no one would come for them, because no one ever had. Get me a unit there now, Isaiah ordered, already moving, his ribs aching with every step but his resolve unshaken. Howard hesitated. Sir, you need medical attention. You're injured. Isaiah didn't slow, didn't turn. I'll rest when this is done. The drive to the bar was tense, the police radio filled with overlapping voices, units confirming positions, updates pouring in. Isaiah rode in the front passenger seat of a squad car, Marcus at the wheel, his grip tight against the steering wheel. Other patrol cars followed close behind, sirens off, engines humming in quiet anticipation. The bar loomed ahead, an old roadside dive with a flickering neon sign, its parking lot dotted with pickup trucks and a single department-issued patrol car theirs. Isaiah's stomach curled at the sight of it, the sheer audacity of them leaving it out in the open, as if this were any other day, as if they had done nothing worth running from. The squad cars pulled in, tires crunching against gravel. Deputies moved into position, hands hovering near holstered weapons but waiting for Isaiah, waiting for their sheriff to lead. Isaiah stepped out of the car, ignoring the way his body protested. His uniform was still torn, still blood-stained, his badge a scorched reminder of what had been taken from him, But he stood tall. He would not be seen as weak. He would not let them see what they had done to him. He walked straight for the door, pushed it open, and the noise inside died instantly. Ethan was at the bar, beer in hand, his head jerking up at the sudden intrusion. Ryan sat beside him, feet propped up on a chair, a smirk just starting to curl at his lips until his eyes met Isaiah's. Silence. The air went thick, heavy with something that wasn't fear not yet but confusion. A moment passed, then Ethan let out a low, disbelieving chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, setting his beer down, turning fully in his seat. "Look who's still standing." Ryan exhaled a slow breath through his nose, shaking his head. "You got some nerve walking in here like that." Isaiah didn't blink, didn't move. "Walker, Cole, you're under arrest." Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. "For what?" He gestured vaguely toward Isaiah's uniform, the bruises, the dried blood. "A little scuffle between officers. That's what this is now." Isaiah's eyes didn't waver. "Assault, attempted murder, destruction of property, obstruction of justice." His voice was steady, cold as steel. "Shall I go on?" The smirk on Ethan's face twitched, faltered for a half-second before he scoffed, shaking his head. He leaned back in his chair, arms stretched lazily over the backrest. "You think you can walk in here and just—" "Stand down, Ethan." The voice came from the doorway, firm, unwavering. Captain Howard. Behind him, half the department stood waiting. Ethan's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists against the table, his mind racing. He was outnumbered. He knew it. Ryan shifted beside him, glancing around, calculating, weighing his options. His leg twitched, his gaze flickering to the gun holstered at his hip. Isaiah saw it a second before it happened. "Don't." "Ah." The single word froze Ryan mid-movement. The bar was silent, the weight of Isaiah's voice pressing down on every inch of the room. "Don't make this worse than it already is," Isaiah continued, his voice even, unshaken. "Stand up. Turn around. Now." For the first time that morning they hesitated. For the first time they understood. The game was over. Slowly, begrudgingly, Ethan lifted his hands in mock surrender. His lip curled, something ugly and hateful twisting in his expression. But he rose to his feet. Ryan followed, his face pale, his breathing tight. A deputy stepped forward, cuffing Ethan first, then Ryan. Neither resisted. As they were led past him, Isaiah met Ethan's gaze head-on, unflinching, unmovable. "You thought you could bury me," he said, voice low. "Measured. Dangerous." Ethan's mouth twisted, his jaw clenching so tight it looked like his teeth might crack. Isaiah leaned in, just slightly. "You should have made sure I was dead." And with that, they were gone. The ride back to the station was quiet. The only sounds were the low murmur of the police radio and the occasional clank of handcuffs as Ethan and Ryan sat in the back of the squad car, their wrists bound behind them. Isaiah sat in the front passenger seat, his hands resting on his knees, his breath measured. His ribs throbbed with every inhale, his body bruised and beaten, but his mind was sharper than ever. Marcus drove, his knuckles white against the wheel, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a blade. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Isaiah could feel Ethan's eyes on him in the rearview mirror, could feel the seething, unspoken hatred burning through the silence. He didn't look back. Didn't acknowledge it. He had already won. The station loomed ahead, the early afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Squad cars lined the curb, deputies standing outside. Waiting, the moment the car rolled to a stop, the back doors were yanked open, officers pulling Ethan and Ryan out, their movements unceremonious. There were no words of protest now, no smug remarks. The weight of reality had finally settled in. Isaiah stepped out, ignoring the stiffness in his legs, the sharp sting of pain lacing through his body. He walked tall, walked strong, walked like a man who had just taken back what was his. As Ethan was led past him, he turned his head slightly, just enough to spit at the ground near Isaiah's boots. "This ain't over," he muttered, low, quiet, venomous. Isaiah didn't flinch, didn't so much as blink. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step closer, closing the small space between them, lowering his voice to something just as quiet, just as lethal. "It is for you." Ethan's jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, but he said nothing, because he knew. Ryan kept his gaze down, his shoulders tight, his face pale. They were led inside, locked away. And just like that, it was over. Or at least the first part was. Isaiah sat in his office, the weight of exhaustion settling deep in his bones. It was the first moment of stillness he'd had since sunrise, the first moment he allowed himself to breathe. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving only pain in its place, but he didn't care. The job was done. His desk was littered with reports, statements from deputies, arrest records. Somewhere in the chaos, his burned badge sat atop a pile of paperwork, its edges blackened, warped, but still whole. A knock at the door. "Come in." Marcus stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. He hesitated, his hands clasped behind his back, as if unsure how to begin. "They've been processed," he said finally. "DA's office is already on it. They won't be walking out of here anytime soon." Isaiah nodded. "Good." A pause. "You should get checked out," Marcus added, his tone softer now. "The hospital." "I'll go," Isaiah interrupted, though he had no intention of doing it just yet. "But first there's something else that needs to be done." Marcus frowned. "Sir?" Isaiah pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the dull ache that radiated through his ribs. He reached for the burned badge, holding it in his fingers for a long moment before looking up at Marcus. "I want a full department review," he said. "Every officer, every file. Background checks, disciplinary actions, internal complaints. If there's another Walker or Cole in this building, I want to know before they ever get the chance to prove it." Marcus straightened. "Yes, sir." Isaiah studied him. Young. Steady. One of the few in this department who hadn't looked at him with doubt, who hadn't hesitated when it mattered. "You did good today," Isaiah said. Marcus looked down, a flicker of something like pride crossing his face before he nodded. "Thank you, sir." Isaiah exhaled slowly, turning back toward the window, watching the town that was now his to protect. He had made his stand. He had sent his message, but this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.